Hello and welcome to the KPI Institute's webinar, How to Conduct a Performance Measurement Maturity Assessment. My name is Andrei Costa and I will be your host for today along with our presenter, Alin Shonda. This webinar is part of a series of free educational materials that aim to enhance the knowledge and know-how of those interested, while also creating a bridge between us as a company and you, our public. The KPI Institute is a research organization specialized in business performance. It operates research programs in 12 practice domains, each linked to a certification course, ranging from strategy and KPIs to employee performance, and from customer service to innovation performance. The KPI Institute continuously builds on its values of best know-how, data and facts, and common sense to achieve its mission of integrating performance as a discipline through research, publications, and, what interests us today, through educational programs such as this webinar. Today, 13 years after the KPI Institute was created, we can proudly say that our products have reached professionals in 5 continents, and that our public comprises a worldwide community of 73,000 members online and 28,000 registered companies on smartkpis.com. Today's webinar focuses on teaching participants how to assess whether the organization is making the best use of its tools and resources in its journey to achieve the desired goals. And it will be delivered by Alin Shonda, the Head of Performance Audit Services at the KPI Institute, with over 10 years of experience in the banking sector. For more than 3 years, he was an internal auditor, gaining an analytical perspective on operations and valuable insight on risk assessment and auditing methods and procedures. As an auditor, he holds valuable experience in the design and implementation of internal processes to properly identify and assess risk and compliance with regulations and reporting requirements. This presentation lasts between 30 to 45 minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have during the webinar, as they will be answered at the end of the presentation in our Q&A session. Enjoy the KPI Institute's webinar, How to Conduct a Performance Measurement Maturity Assessment. Now, I would like to invite Alin to begin his presentation.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. Thank you, Andrei, for presenting. As Andrei said, in today's webinar, I'm going to present to you an assessment methodology that we use to address the maturity of the performance measurement capability within an organization. Now, from my point of view, you cannot manage performance if you don't measure it, and you need to measure it against the strategic objectives that have been set out. Now, throughout the webinar, I'm going to present to you the benefits of such an assessment. I'm going to present the key knowledge areas or dimensions that we look at when we assess the performance measurement capability. I'm going to present to you the maturity model that we use and that we have developed especially for this. And I'm going to give you some examples on how we assess the maturity of this capability, along with details about the process. In the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the outputs, and we're going to have a questions and answer sessions to address any of your potential questions. Now, the learning objectives of this webinar, first of all, you need to acknowledge the importance of the performance measurement maturity assessment, as it supports the competitive advantage of an organization. You will understand the impact of such assessments, and you will get familiar with the main tools we use for assessing the maturity of the performance measurement capability. Also, valuable insights will be presented on the assessment process and the use of the outputs. Now, the first topic on the agenda is benefits. First benefit is ensuring that you have the right tools, processes, and people in the right place. And this is accomplished by the fact that it's a thorough assessment, and we look at all the components, the responsibilities, we look for accountability in the performance measurement process. With this assessment, you will identify the maturity level of the performance measurement capability, and you will provide the client organization a clear roadmap on how to progress from the current maturity level to the next one. And this relates to maximizing the added value generated by the performance measurement process, as the methodology compares current practices to best practices. This assessment also supports progress with implementing initiatives. I've mentioned the roadmap for improvement, and within the outputs, there's also a roadmap for improvement infographic that can be used during performance review meetings. Such an assessment conducted within an organization educates stakeholders to be oriented towards continuous learning and improving. And it's a strong message coming from the management that they chose to conduct such an assessment and see what's to improve within the performance measurement capability. And last but not least, it can justify investments in process improvement. Maybe the organization has invested significant amounts of money in developing the capability, this performance measurement capability, and I'm talking here about software solutions, human capital, and so on. Now, the next section in today's webinar are the key knowledge areas. And for this, I'm going to show you the framework. Now, it's very important for you to acknowledge the 6 dimensions. First of all, we look at KPI selection, assessing the processes, tools, and techniques employed by the entity to select KPIs. We're looking for the standardization of tools and practices, but also to the relevancy and alignment of KPIs to the strategy. The next dimension is KPI documentation. This aims to identify whether KPIs are documented and how this process takes place in terms of the tools used, people involved, and the information being kept up to date. The following dimension is target setting. Here we assess the extent to which target setting relies on data and manages to create a stimulating environment to reach and exceed targets. In data gathering, we look at the data collection process in terms of data sources, data timeliness, and accuracy. It also looks into the usage of software solutions to enable data gathering, modeling, and reporting. The following dimension is data visualization. Here we evaluate the entity's approach in terms of visual design of data. The instruments are assessed from the perspective of data visualization good practices. And the last dimension, KPI governance, we assess the internal accountability levels over the performance measurement processes. These are selection, documentation, target setting, and data gathering. And basically, this dimension refers to the overall process of owning and distributing responsibility for performance measurement within the organization. Now, let's start with a poll. I want to ask you, this is a statement that you need to think about and answer with one of the 3 options. The statement is, we are confident the KPIs in use are adequate for reflecting the achievement of desired outcomes. Now, the options are 1A, high to very high extent or very high degree, moderate extent, moderate degree, or very small to small extent, very small to small degree. Now, please take 1 minute to answer the poll. I'll wait for my colleague. Okay, we have it up. Please answer the poll, and we're gonna look over the results together. Okay, I think everyone got a chance to answer. Can we see the results? Okay, so most of you answered moderate extent, moderate degree, that's 67%. 22% of you said high to very high extent. I'm very glad to hear it. And 11% of you said very small to small extent. So there's still room for improvement. Now, there's a reason why I've asked you this question. This was a question sent to our network of professionals working in the performance management field. It's part of a research study called State of Performance Improvement and Key Performance Indicator Practice Report from last year, from 2016. Now, you can see here the results that we obtained in our research studies. Opposite to today's poll, most of the respondents said that the KPIs are adequate in a high to very high extent. Now, to best reflect on the achievement of desired outcomes, KPIs require attentive selections. KPIs selected as such need to be clear and relevant to provide adequate measurement of the objectives set out. Now, the research study reveals a moderate to high level of confidence in selected KPIs being adequate for reflecting the achievement of desired outcomes among the majority of professionals. Now, 30% answered moderate extent and another 55% high to very high extent. Only 15% of respondents claim to be less confident about the relevancy of their KPIs. Now, as a research-based organization specialized in business performance, we're interested in the way organizations use performance measurement systems, the challenges they face, as well as their latest practices in improving performance. The methodology for our maturity assessment is comprised of best practices. These are best practices that were documented over years of research and validated with our community of professionals using this kind of research studies. And now, the State of Performance Improvement and Key Performance Indicator Practice Report highlights the findings from the KPI Institute's ongoing efforts of identifying issues, trends, and best practices impacting the field of key performance indicators and performance management. This research study provides insights into the performance management practices of today, practices ranging from KPI selection to data analysis and reporting, and from decision-making to initiatives management. Now, let's move forward and talk about the maturity models that we use to conduct maturity assessments. Now, the first thing you need to know is that maturity models are tools used to assess the complexity of a certain organizational capability or system. I'm saying of a certain organizational capability or system because we don't only have one maturity model framework for performance measurement, we have 5 of them. The first being for the strategic planning capability, second, performance measurement, then performance management, performance culture, and employee performance management. And altogether, using all these 5 maturity models, we assess the maturity of the integrated performance capability within an organization. Now, second characteristic of maturity models is that they usually have a 5-level scale, and this is the same for us. We have level 1 initial, level 2 emergent, level 3 structured, level 4 integrated, and level 5 optimized. This for showing you exactly where you stand at this point and giving you a clear guidance on how to progress to the next level, because there is clear criteria that defines each maturity level. Now, another interesting fact that you should know is that progression from one maturity level to another becomes more difficult as maturity increases. Or in other words, it's easier to go from level 1 initial to level 2 emergent than it's to get from level 4 integrated to level 5 optimized. Now, let's get to the fun part, and this is the assessment process, and I'm sure you're interested in this section. First of all, I said it's a thorough assessment and it follows best practices in auditing, so we have an evidence-based assessment. So in this section, we look at relevant internal documents, and we have more than 25 statements that reflect best practices, each statement having assessment criteria for each score from 1 to 5. Now, these are the statements that need to be rated by the assessor, by the auditor, on a scale from 1 to 5, looking at the assessment criteria and some additional guidance that we provide to the assessors. The second stage of the assessment is the perception-based assessment. And here we have another set of statements that reflect best practices, but these statements need to be scored by internal key stakeholders. So we sent out a survey using our online platform to internal key stakeholders like board members, top management, middle management, KPI owners, data custodians, basically the people that interact with the performance management system on a day-to-day basis. The third stage of the assessment is the interview-based assessment. So what we do with this stage, we collect the findings from the evidence-based assessment based on the internal documentation review. We collect the findings from the perception-based assessment. We compare the results, and we use interviews to consolidate our findings to ensure consistency in results and to avoid disputes with the assessed organization. Now, I've mentioned the online platform. This is gpaunit.org. This online platform has integrated features that support the evidence-based assessment, the perception-based assessment, and even the interview-based assessment. And I'll show you how throughout today's webinar. As a scoring methodology, when we talked about maturity models, I showed you the 5 levels ranging from initial to optimized. Now, what we do is we take the final score from the evidence-based assessment, which weighs 75% in the final score because it reflects facts, actual results, and we look at the perception-based assessment score. This weighs only 25% in the final score. Now, perception is important, but not as important as facts. Okay, so we get the final score, and the final score determines the current maturity level. Now, let's get to some examples for you to better understand how we conduct the assessment and learn more about the statements that reflect best practices and the assessment criteria that we use. But first of all, let's continue with another poll. We have a statement here saying a variety of key stakeholders, employees, managers, suppliers are engaged in the KPI selection process. Now, the options for your answers are high to very high extent or high to very high degree, moderate extent, moderate degree, very small to small extent, very small to small degree. Now, as before, please take 1 minute to answer the poll, and then we'll look together at the results. Okay, I think all of you got a chance to answer the poll. Can we see the results? Okay, most of you, 58%, answered moderate extent. In regards to the question about which stakeholders are engaged during the KPI selection process, 25% of you answered very small to small extent, and only 17% of you said high to very high extent. Again, this shows that there is still room for improvement. Now, it's very important in the KPI selection process to engage with as many stakeholders as we can, and not so much the stakeholders, but their role, a variety of roles within the organization. Now, as before, this is one of the statements that was included in our research report, State of Performance Improvement and Key Performance Indicator Practice Report. These are the answers from our research study. In this research study, 30% of professionals admit to the key stakeholders of the organization being modestly engaged within the KPI selection process. Stakeholder engagement in the KPI selection process, on the other hand, ultimately ensures that KPIs are appropriately selected while also being relevant for the strategic objectives set out. Now, aware of the important contribution of stakeholders to the KPI selection process are 39% of respondents, that claim to extensively engage their key stakeholders in selecting KPIs for the organization. The last third of survey respondents indicate a moderate involvement from key stakeholders in the KPI selection process. Now, let me give you an example now of statements that we use for the maturity assessment process within this dimension, KPI selection. But first of all, this is a slide from one of our courses, the Certified KPI Professional Training course, showing us the sources for information when we're thinking about selecting KPIs. And as you see here, we have primary and secondary sources, internal and external sources. This is just a slide for you to get a picture and to better understand what a wide variety of sources you can have when selecting KPIs, including online catalogs like smartkpis.com. This is the largest database of documented KPIs that we own and administrate. And now, an example. This is one of the statements from the evidence-based assessment for the dimension KPI selection from the performance measurement maturity model framework. And the statement is, the KPI selection process is well articulated. Now, as assessment criteria for the statement, you have the following items captured in a process map. This regards to the KPI selection process, having a filtering criteria list based on which KPIs are validated during selection, using specific tools and techniques like KPI balancing, like value flow analysis and KPI clustering, having the KPI selection organized as a workshop. I will insist on this. This is very important. Have a workshop with some selected key stakeholders, and it will be easier for you to select KPIs. And the last assessment criteria regards gathering insights from both internal and external stakeholders. Now, you saw in the slide from the KPI course the variety of sources that you can use when you're selecting KPIs. Now, this is not the only statement that is part of the evidence-based assessment for KPI selection. Now, we're looking also at having the KPI set balanced with at least 2 KPIs for each objective, balancing focus between financial and non-financial KPIs, having KPIs names standardized to be easy to understand for anyone who needs to work with those KPIs. And I have another example for you, but before that, I've mentioned the GPA unit online platform and how much it supports the process. Now, this is a screenshot from the backend meant for assessors, and you can see here you have the statement saying the KPI selection process is well articulated. You have assessment criteria for each score. Like for score 2, minimum 2 criteria from level 5, for score 3, minimum 3 criteria from level 5, and all the criteria that you saw in the previous slide is listed here for score 5. Now, we even have fields for observations and references to the documents that provided you with this information. And an example from the perception-based assessment. This is a statement captured by the survey that we sent out to key stakeholders. And the example is, the KPIs are relevant for the objectives or areas, processes they were selected to measure. This is something that internal key stakeholders have to assess and rate on a scale from 1 to 5 based on the extent to which the statement applies for their organization. Now, there are other statements included in the survey, like identifying and analyzing relevant internal and external information sources, like having the KPI selection follow a structured and well-prepared approach using a combination of tools and methods, as well as how clear and concise, easy to be understood and communicated are KPI names, and so on. And again, the GPA unit online platform facilitates the process as the survey is deployed directly from the platform. There's no other instrument used like SurveyMonkey, for example. And after the stakeholders answer the survey, you just click a button to export all questions answers, and you get all your answers in a table with average scores and the final score for the perception-based assessment already calculated. And this is the same for the evidence-based assessment. You rate the statements, you write your observations, your references to documents, and in the end, you can export all your work in a centralized table with all the information there, along with average scores already calculated and the final score as well. Now, the next section, the next dimension through which we assess the performance measurement process, the performance measurement capability, is KPI documentation. Now, this is an example. It's public, it's free, it's on our website. It's how a KPI documentation form should look and what are the fields that should be included in the KPI documentation form. You can see here, we not only have the name of the KPI, but we also have the descriptions, variations, or related KPIs. We have the calculation formula with subordinate metrics, and we even have a field saying trend is good when increasing in this example. We have the purpose, the balance scorecard perspective, we have the objective that is measured with the use of this KPI. We have information about data collection, about targets, including thresholds, and we have other notes or other references that were helpful in documenting this KPI. Now, the example for the evidence-based assessment is the following statement. The entity uses a standardized KPI documentation form. And the assessment criteria, this is an average score. This is score 3, the assessment criteria for score 3. And in this example, the KPI documentation form should include at least the KPI name, the definition, the calculation formula, the associated objective, and targets and thresholds. This is a screenshot from the online platform. Here you can see all the assessment criteria. For example, for score 5, you need way more than the fields that were presented in the previous slide. We even have some ID codes or area or department name, the level, organizational level, corporate, operational, individual, even data capturing limitations, and the name of the data custodian and the KPI owner. A statement from the survey looks into the benefits of documenting KPIs to be understood among key stakeholders such as KPI owners and data custodians. Again, from the perception-based assessment, when we're talking about perception, we're talking about the survey sent to internal key stakeholders, and they need to rate the statement on a scale from 1 to 5 based on the extent to which they agree the statement reflects how they work within their organization. Now, regarding this KPI documentation, we're also addressing other questions in the survey that relate to the impact and the results of this process. Okay, so we're asking if all KPIs are documented prior to KPI activation. We're asking if the benefits of documenting KPIs are understood among key stakeholders, and we're even asking if the KPI internal database provides reliable information as it is constantly updated. Okay, the next section is target setting. Regarding the target setting process, I have another slide here from our KPI course highlighting the fact that for target setting, consultations should take place, and we should start with top management. Another important thing is that as KPIs are active and data is gathered, targets may be reviewed and recalibrated. This is very important. We tend to be really ambitious when we set out targets. We have this review after 1 month, after 2 months, and we usually acknowledge that some recalibrating must be done. Now, as you can see here also in the scheme, targets need to be adjusted periodically as the internal and external environment of the company is in a permanent change. Now, markets change, clients change, the needs of clients change, as well as technology advances real fast. Now, let me ask you a question before I show you some examples from target setting. The question is, the targets associated with KPIs are realistic. Now, you have three options, just as before: high to very high extent, high to very high degree, moderate extent, moderate degree, and the last option, very small to small extent, very small to small degree. As before, please take 1 minute to answer the question. I'll ask my colleague to set out the poll. Thank you. Okay, I see that most of you got a chance to answer. Can we see the results? Okay, so moderate extent, moderate degree again, 60% of you answered with option 2. And we have a tie here, 20% said high to very high extent, 20% said very small to small extent. Now, as before, I asked you to answer this question because it was part of our research study. Now, one of the most important fields in the KPI documentation form is the KPI target. Setting targets supports the decision-making process by comparing results to expectations and linking results to actions. Assigning realistic targets for the KPIs monitored seemed to be a common practice among 45% of the participants to the survey. Now, please remember this research report was sent out or was done with the help of professionals working in the performance management field. Now, the survey shows that 40% of the participants to the survey exhibit moderate confidence in KPI targets being realistic, while another 15% of professionals have little to very little confidence in KPI targets being realistic for their organization. Now, let's move on, and I'll show you an example. For the evidence-based assessment, all active KPIs have targets established. Now, this is usually a statement that we rate by looking at scorecards and looking at KPI documentation forms. Now, the assessment criteria looks at the percentage of KPIs from our sample, this considering conducting a performance measurement maturity assessment for a large organization. If it's a small organization, we're going to look at all the KPIs. But as a methodology for rating this statement, we're looking at the percentage of KPIs that have targets associated. And I'll give you some examples. If between 55 and 75% of the KPIs have targets, then the score is 3. If more than 90% of the KPIs, then the score will be 5 for this statement. Now, this is not the only statement that we have in this section. We're even looking at KPIs that have thresholds, or the percentage of KPIs that also have thresholds. We're looking at the target setting process, looking to see if it's well articulated, if it takes into consideration historical data, which stakeholders are involved, and so on. And we're even looking to see if the organization uses benchmarking data for setting targets. Now, an example from the survey, from the perception-based assessment, the targets established for the KPIs are generating a strong sense of accountability and engagement towards their achievement. Same as before, internal key stakeholders rate the statement on a scale from 1 to 5 based on the extent to which they consider the statement applying in their organization. Okay, let's move on to the next dimension, that's data gathering. This is again also from our certified KPI professional training course, and it shows the main challenges that we face when we're gathering data to calculate KPI results. And these are completeness, timeliness, and accuracy. Now, I will take it from the end, accurate. This is very, very important to have accurate data because the analysis of KPI results facilitates the decision-making process. So accurate data provided on time and provided complete. Okay, no missing information. Again, from our research study, we asked a question regarding software being used to collect data and report on performance results. And what we found out is that 65% of our respondents still use Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word. Now, this is not bad. You can have data gathering templates that you can use by using the software solutions, but we see here that only 19% of respondents use customized software solutions or standard software solution for this. Now, it's very important for you to acknowledge that technology advances real fast. I'm quite sure that in our next research report, we'll have more organizations using customized software solutions or standard software solution for this. And an example from the data gathering dimension, there is a well-articulated data gathering process. And within the statement, we're trying to see if the data gathering process is captured in a process map, if it relies on a standardized template, if all KPIs have data gathering deadlines. This is again timeliness. You saw it, main challenge. The quality of data gathered is assessed periodically in terms of accuracy, completeness, and timeliness. And the KPI selection process is being automated by using a dedicated business intelligence software solution. Now, I will stick to the assessment criteria for this statement just to share with you some other statements that we use to assess this dimension. One of them being very important, all KPIs selected are active. That means the data can and is collected. And also we're looking to see the percentage of KPIs that have data collection systems in place. Now, to move on to perception and give you one example from the survey, the cost for measuring selected KPIs does not exceed the benefits of having the data. And this is because our assessment not only looks at processes and tools, but also looks at the results and the impact. Okay, so it's very important for the cost of measuring KPIs not to exceed the benefits of having the data. And to give you some other examples here from data gathering, we have other statements captured in the survey, like the technology supporting the data collection process is relying on the integration of different data sources and database. The KPI data collection is completed on time according to pre-established schedules, and inaccurate data happens rarely. Okay. Now, let's move on to data visualization. Here I have some examples also from our certified KPI professional training course. For this example, here is an example of don't. Okay, so as best practice is really researched and documented by the KPI Institute, is very important in data visualization, not to use 3D charts, not to have crowded data in one graph, avoid pie charts as much as you can. For example, in this picture with the KPI sales by product, you can figure out that if we take the data labels like 20%, 15%, 20% out of the pie chart, you cannot comprehend or estimate which percentage you have for each product in this case. Now, also avoid strong color background, strong background grids, avoid spaghetti charts, avoid background patterns, and avoid a large diversity of colors. You can see here in sales by region how the colors really disturb us. I can barely read Asia, for example. Now, this is not the only example. This is another example of don'ts. I've mentioned the 3D charts, and look at this chart, average sales by agent. I presume very hard to interpret data by looking at this chart. But let me show you some positive examples. Okay, some do's. So ensure graphic sustainability, suitability, sorry, for the data. Graphical representations should have titles, make sure no data is missing. Clear outline of axes, having scales for all axes, having the scales start from 0. You can see here line charts are very good to analyze trends, and as well bar charts are very good, and colors are not used in excess. And a statement from our methodology: there are visual elements for all performance management tools used. So in this statement, we rate this statement by looking at the percentage of tools that have data visualization. And here I'm talking about scorecards, dashboards, performance reports, and so on. And an example from perception-based assessment: scorecards, dashboards, and performance reports are easy to read, analyze, and understand results. Now, this is a question, again, sent out to internal key stakeholders. They have to rate it on a scale from 1 to 5 based on the extent to which this statement applies for their organization. Now, to give you some other examples, regarding data visualization, here in the perception-based assessment, we're even asking if graphical representation of KPIs are relevant and in accordance with the type of data displayed. Or we're asking whether graphical representations of KPIs are informative and well-designed. Now, let's move on to the last section, and this is KPI governance. Last but not least, it is very important. And to give you a quick picture of what we understand by governance, alongside having a dedicated office or department within the organization that is responsible, has this responsibility of measuring performance, we're looking at some roles like KPI owner, data custodian, and report generator. Now, the KPI owner is the one responsible for reaching KPI targets. So I'm looking at middle managers, top managers, supervisors, and so on for this role. Data custodians are the people responsible for gathering the data to collect, to calculate KPI results. And in a small organization, usually the data custodian is the one that also generates the reports, the performance reports. But in some cases, we even have data analysts, business analysts, or a strategy or performance manager within the organization who is responsible for generating performance reports. Now, our research study shows that more and more organizations have a KPI owner for KPIs. You can see here that 47% answered to this question with high to very high extent, and 29% answered with moderate extent. Now you can also see it's a significant percentage. 24% said very small to small extent regarding all documented KPIs having a corresponding KPI owner. Now, if the KPIs don't have KPI owners, there's always going to be a discussion like who's responsible for those results. So this is a practice that we highly encourage, to have these roles within the organization and have them clearly set out for people within the organization. Now, an example from this dimension, there is a well-developed governance framework for the performance measurement process. And here we have the following assessment criteria: performance measurement office, or a full-time position dedicated to performance measurement, to the performance measurement system, a manual or a written procedure or a section of a manual or procedure on how performance is measured within the organization, having clear roles of data custodian and KPI owners. Now, this is the assessment criteria that we use for this statement. Again, it is not the only statement from the evidence-based assessment. We're looking to see whether dedicated training and or coaching programs on performance measurement are available to all key employees, and we're even checking if the processes related to performance measurement are mapped. And I'm talking here about KPI selection, documentation, target setting, and data gathering. Now, I'll give an example for the perception-based assessment. All stakeholders involved in the governance of the performance measurement system are fully accountable and motivated towards continuous performance improvement. And again, this is not the only statement. We are asking also if the performance measurement system is reviewed and updated whenever is required, if this measurement system adds value to the entity, and if the performance measurement system reflects in an accurate and comprehensive manner the requirements of the strategy execution process. Because basically this is why we measure performance, to monitor strategy execution. That's why we have KPIs set out for the objectives that we established, and so on. Now, another relevant statement for this section is there is a high degree of awareness and knowledge expertise for measuring performance in the organization. Now, I give you some examples, more examples than the ones on the slides, for how we conduct the assessment, as well as from the evidence-based part where we look at documents, as well from the survey where we capture the perception of internal key stakeholders. Now, let me show you the outputs. First of all, there's an audit report, which is a comprehensive report that has findings and recommendations on the assessed capabilities and each dimension. Alongside with this report, we offer organizations an executive dashboard, which comprises of the scores achieved on each capability and each dimension. You can see here what I've mentioned before. We're not only assessing the maturity of the performance measurement process. We're looking at the strategic planning process, how the organization manages performance, their initiatives towards building a performance-oriented culture, and how they manage employee performance, so basically individual performance. This is an example of a complete executive dashboard with overall scores for integrated performance. Now, alongside the audit report and the executive dashboard, we also offer a roadmap for continuous improvement. And in this roadmap, we prioritize and we place the recommendations from the audit report in a logical and chronological order. This is very important because the roadmap for improvement report guides the organization on how to progress from the current level to the next one, and from the next one to the next one, and so on. In this example, we have an organization that achieved level 2 maturity in terms of performance measurement. So we have clear guidance on how to get from level 2 to level 3, and then how to get from level 3 to level 4, followed by how to get from level 4 to level 5. Now, Alongside the roadmap for continuous improvement report, we also delivered the roadmap for continuous improvement infographic. And this is a tool that can be used by the strategy manager during performance review meetings to check the progress on the initiatives meant to consolidate the performance management framework. Any organization which goes through the maturity assessment for their performance measurement capability is officially recognized. We issue a certificate of recognition highlighting the achieved maturity level. And you can see here that no matter the maturity level, whether it's 1, 3, or 5, we still issue this certificate of recognition. Now, I hope that by this point, you've acknowledged the importance of such a maturity assessment. You've learned a lot about how we assess the maturity, because you've seen some examples of statements that we use both for the evidence-based assessment and the perception-based assessment. So I want to ask you honestly, knowing all this that I presented today, thinking about the performance measurement process within your organization, what do you think the maturity level, the current maturity level of this capability is? And you have 5 options here to answer corresponding to the maturity levels that we have in the maturity model. So as before, please take 1 minute to answer this question, because I want to see how you perceive the maturity of your performance measurement capability at this point. Okay, I think most of you got a chance to answer. Can we see the results? Oh, okay. So, highest score, structured, 50%. Emergent and initial, it's a tie, 25%, 25%. Now, I'm surprised to see that none of you answered integrated or optimized. I believe you got a clear picture by looking at the assessment criteria, and for sure I give you some pointers on things that you could consider to improve the performance measurement process. Now, very important for you to know, you've seen 6 examples, 1 for each dimension from the evidence-based assessment, and another 6 examples from the perception-based assessment. Now, if you go to our website, gpunit.org, you will find a self-assessment survey. Now, this self-assessment survey, it's available not only for performance measurement, but all the 5 capabilities that are part of our integrated performance maturity model framework. So you can check other statements that reflect best practices for performance measurement, for strategic planning, performance culture, employee performance management, and of course, performance management. Now, if you take the self-assessment, at the end, you'll get a result. You'll see the perceived maturity level at this point. It will give you a better understanding on the maturity assessment itself. And not only this, we also have a demo account to our online platform. This is a demo account that you can access for free. All you need to do is go to the subscriptions page. This is the 5th element of the main menu in the top part of the website, and in the subscription page you have a contact form saying I'm want access to the demo account, just fill in your data, and you will be provided with a login page, username, and password to access the demo account. Now, also in the subscriptions page, there's a short video presenting the features of the online platform. You'll be able to test for yourself how the online platform collects responses for the survey, how it exports the results, and how much it supports the maturity assessment process. Again, this is an online demo account. It's free. You can access it. All you have to do is go to the subscriptions page from gpuni.org and fill in a contact form. Now, after you get a feel on the online platform, how it works and how useful it is, you can go for one of our subscriptions to get access to the complete maturity model framework and start assessing the maturity of the performance measurement capability today. Now, what I want you to remember after this webinar is that the maturity assessment is designed to indicate the current maturity level of the performance measurement capability. Now, the outputs highlight as well the strengths, but also the weaknesses of the performance measurement process, but they support performance improvement through the recommendations and the roadmap for continuous improvement. Now, this kind of assessment helps elevate current practices to best practices to add value to the performance measurement process. Now, I've told you this before, the maturity assessment is conducted with the help of the dedicated online platform. All the statements that reflect best practices, all the assessment criteria are there, the additional guidance is there, and the online platform even supports the data collection. I'm talking here about relevant internal documents, so you don't need to have sensitive documents sent by emails or file sharing services. The online platform does it all, helps you collect the documents, help you analyze them and rate the statements from the evidence-based assessment. It helps you deploy the survey, collect the results, calculate the final score, and determine the current maturity level. Now, the self-assessment survey and the demo account, which I presented you earlier, will help you get a clear perspective on performance measurement maturity assessment. So I highly encourage you to try the self-assessment and also try the demo account if you wish to conduct such an assessment for your organization. Next, you have some references here, some links to the GPA Unit online platform, the research report that I've presented to you, as well as the training course from which I've shown you some slides, the certified KPI course. A link to our webinars archive, details about our upcoming webinar, and also our upcoming courses. We have a course for Certified Performance Audit Professional. This is designed to help you understand and apply the maturity model frameworks and assessing the maturity of these 5 capabilities and basically the maturity of your performance management system within the organization. So you can still register to this course. It's going to take place from the 20th to the 22nd of November this year, and it's going to be organized in Singapore. Now, thank you all again for attending this webinar. I hope the information that I've provided was helpful. Continuing, we're going to have the questions and answers session. I will kindly ask you to ask questions that relate to the maturity assessment process, how we conduct it, and not only about the performance measurement practice itself. This webinar was designed for those interested in conducting such assessments and finding solutions for improving performance within their organization. So I will ask my colleague, Andrei, to see if we have questions so far.
Right now there are no questions, but if anyone has any curiosities, queries of any kind, feel free to address them now. All right, we received a question. Aline, how can someone get a PMO related KPI for the education sector, or several KPIs, PMO related KPIs for the education sector?
Well, that's very easy. I've shown you a slide with some sources, one of them being smartkpis.com. From what I know, there's a very cheap subscription plan. I think it's called Preview. It's less than $20. So you can just use that to access the platform and get up to 20 KPIs that you're interested in. Be careful though. In terms of smartkpis.com, our online database for KPIs, you have different KPIs in terms of the amount of information that's available. So you have premium KPIs with more than 24 fields documented, like the example I've shown you. But still, it's the best source of KPIs from my point of view. You just access it, browse through functional areas, through industries, and select the types of KPIs that you're interested in, premium, basic, and so on.
All right, so for now, there seem to be no more questions. If anyone remembers something that they forgot to ask, you can contact us via email, and we'll do our best to answer as soon as possible. And this brings us to the end of our webinar. Aline, do you have any last words for our listeners?
Yes, Andre, thank you all so much for joining. I hope that today's webinar was useful for you, the information that you received. And thank you again, Andre, for presenting. I wish you all the best of performance.
Thank you once again very much for your presentation. The KPI Institute appreciates your interest in the webinar How to Conduct a Performance Measurement Maturity Assessment. Follow our websites and our social media channels to find out more details and to subscribe to our next webinar, A Balanced Scorecard System Approach in the Healthcare Sector, which will be held by Andrea Minelli, a business analyst and certified benchmarking and KPI professional at the KPI Institute. Also, if you are interested in getting a certification granted by the KPI Institute on vital areas within the performance management discipline, you can explore our scheduled courses on marketplace.kpiinstitute.org. Thank you once again for your participation and have a nice day.